Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Peter, using words, can you give a logical explanation or argument or exposition of how consciousness is universal and not separate? If one were to discuss that and
because there's nothing findable but experience, and experience is, of course, dependent upon consciousness. Theoretically, if there was a consciousness that had that was a principle of consciousness or an activity of consciousness, consciousness can't be found. But on the other hand, if there is anything, you could say there's consciousness, because the only thing that can be found is experience, and experience seems to be intrinsically consist of consciousness.
well, we can't find anger and we can't find love. I mean, there's lots of things that we can't find, and they seem to be endemic to an individual.
No, they appear in experience. It's the strongest thing you could say. And then whether or not there's an individual, you can look into that, but that starts getting hypothetical.
Yeah.
It may or may not be an individual, but it's certainly an experiential field.
That which enables that to happen.
Well, but there's no something enabling something else to happen. It's just experience is this. It's experience. There's no consciousness over here and events over here. You can't find it.
As opposed to a body mind.
As opposed, I'm not sure I follow you. A body mind is just another assertion of some event that's occurring. And if we're looking for body minds, you have to look in experience. And so again, it just becomes a hypothetical way of trying to describe a sub-event occurring within experience as if it was in any sense discrete or separate, and no discreteness or separateness can be found. There's only the experiential field, which includes any and all seeming events that may appear, and includes any and all consciousness or awareness that may seem to be there. But none of those things are findable. All that's findable is the totality itself, this that is here. And it includes an infinite degree of apparent differentiation, but it doesn't have any parts or separation in it whatsoever. So it's a very paradoxical condition. And then you can suppose that each of the differentiations is somehow separate and discrete, but then each of the differentiations consists of another infinity of differentiations there, and you can suppose they're all separate and discrete, and so on and so on. And you can end up with pixels all the way down.
Well, let's say then, as opposed to thinking, thought, that is something that is experienced, that is not experienced in the experiential field.
What?
Because, well,
how do you know you're thinking?
Well, whatever you want to call it, it's one of the experiences that does not seem to be shared.
No experience is shared. I see your face. Are you seeing your face? You see my face. I don't see my face. Where's the sharing? I see that wall. You see this wall. Where's the sharing?
You guys see your face, and you don't see the same thing.
Yeah, you don't see the same face. You see a different face. And God knows what color you see. Of course, God knows what color you see, for that matter.
That is an experience that is somewhat shared.
But somewhat shared is spin doctored into existence. It's a degree of similarity, which is a way of saying it's totally different. You can claim, you can develop, you know, you can develop theories, kind of a mathematics of degrees of similarity, but you never can find sameness.
Well, going back to thinking,
Mhm.
thoughts, that seems to be not ex- available to anything or anyone other than that which is thinking of it.
But nothing is available to anyone else. And maybe it is available.
Well,
My wife's a very loud thinker.
well,
I'm in the kitchen with her. No, I'm talking about thinking. She's a loud thinker. She's also a loud speaker, but she's a loud thinker. I'll be in the kitchen with her, and I know what she's thinking. I mean, we say the same thing, you know, more often than not. And anyhow, the point is not the supposition that anything is available to others cannot actually be found. It's viable. It's a hypothesis. We can suppose we're seeing the same rug, but the experience is different, and you can't know if I'm having experience at all, and I can't know if you're having experience at all, because you are an apparition within my experience, and I am an apparition within your experience. So you can hypothesize that I'm seeing a rug, but the best you can do is hold that as a hypothesis.
well, let's say this fire that hits everyone.
It doesn't hit everyone.
That it hits in the smoke and the air. It is a
No.
shared.
It's not shared. It hits each one individually. Each person has a different individual experience of this fire. It's like you have your experience of the fire, I have my experience of the fire, John has his experience of the fire, and so on and so on. And we can say, oh, but it's the same fire. You know, but that's an assertion that has no basis, because it's based on completely different experiences. And or it's based upon the supposition of other experience. I mean, the only experience you can find is your own. And you can suppose that other people have experience and all that, but you can't know that. That's a hypothesis.
Well, in a way, even the smoke is a hypothesis.
Well, that smoke is a hypothesis. The experience of it is
That's something.
whatever it is.
Yeah.
It gets a little less easy to describe when you say pi r squared. Because pi r squared means the same to everybody who understands pi r.
Well, theoretically it does, but it doesn't actually. It means what it means to each individual that it means something to, in actual fact. I mean, we can talk about any word you can use. It means what it means to each individual, and it will mean something different to every individual. So I say, tree, and my sense of what a tree is, and your sense of what a tree is, and your sense of what a tree is, and your sense of what a tree is going to be different.
That's why I said pi r squared, because there's no mental interpretation of that.
But there is mental
Circle is a
interpretation.
circle, right? So when I see a circle, and
Well, it's not a circumference,
It's what it represents.
it's a formula. It doesn't tell you anything about the circle.
But it's only a formula if it exists in someone's experience.
I think everybody
Before-
understands what pi r squared means.
Maybe, but they each have a different understanding.
Well, how about
Maybe some
gravity?
people are less than that mathematically literate. Maybe some people have to doctorates in mathematics. I mean, who knows? And they each will have a very different understanding of what that means.
is it the circumference or the area?
Circumference.
Because the symbols have meaning to the extent they refer to to experience. And everyone has a different experience. You know, one person you say pi r squared and they'll think of their math class, or they'll think of their math teacher that they liked or hated, or they'll think of this or that, or they'll think of some book that they read, or they'll see a picture of an illustration in a book that they read, or whatever. And some other people will have very different kinds of experiences.
Yeah, but I'm not talking about how you experience it. It is a concept.
But it's only a concept if it's someone's concept. If everyone dropped dead, where would pi r squared be? If there were no humans. Yeah,
But
for the ants, where would pi r squared be?
we are not dead and we're not ants.
Right.
We're humans, and we have some of us have a concept of the circumference of a circle.
Of course.
And that it is not interpreted. The theory is not interpreted. But
the theory,
experience of it is.
but even the theory only exists if it's existing to you. To someone, there might not be any theory. To someone, it might just be some words they memorized in math class, and they have a drawing that goes with it. So even theory, it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist objectively. It's not actually shared. I mean, it's a special case of every language. Like we're throwing English words back at each other. What you understand by the words, the whole connotation and implication, and what I understand by the words is going to be different. And now it may arguably be similar enough that we can pretend to ourselves we're having a conversation.
Well, it's something like gravity, is it confined to a formula?
Gravity exists when it appears in your experience.
I mean, it's-
Someone right now that's falling off a cliff and hasn't landed yet has a very different experience of gravity than you do. An astronaut in the space lab has a very different experience of gravity than you do.
well, it's-
Rather than sort of talking about this detail and that detail and this, what principle are you trying to approach?
I'm just trying to describe to someone how consciousness is not just their consciousness, but is a union, or is that which enables life to be.
Well, here's life, and it's appearing in consciousness. It's a done deal. No life ever appears outside of consciousness, as far as anyone can tell.
Well, when someone dies, let's say they lose a potential for life.
No, you don't know what happens when someone dies to them. You know what it looks like to you. When you die, then you'll know what it looks like to you. But so you see someone dies, you see it out from outside. You don't see what they're seeing. You don't know what it looks like to them. And you can have theories, but they aren't based on anything. They're based on fantasy.
Well, we know when it's not operating on a physical level.
What do you mean?
Well, when someone dies,
When you say it's not operating, what do you mean by not operating?
through the physical mind-body
There's
physicality.
the cells are functioning the way that they are. The cell, the orderly deterioration of the cells and the chemistry and all of that. That's all. What is that? You're defining that as not being consciousness? Is consciousness separate from something? It's the laws of physics over here and consciousness over here.
Yeah.
They are. Oh, okay. Where do the laws of physics appear, Joel? Where do the laws of physics appear?
Down the road.
Okay.
The laws of physics appear in your experience. Have they ever appeared anywhere else?
The guest hosted Saturday Night Live.
Huh?
The guest hosted Saturday Night Live.
I missed that. I'm sorry.
You asked if they ever appeared anywhere else. I said the guest hosted Saturday Night Live.
There's things that people can do to feel like they've got more of a shared experience or more sympathetic engagement with each other.
Perhaps, but that's all, again, that's all subjective. Suppose we feel like we're really sharing something. That word, that sentence, we feel like we're really sharing something, is a euphemism for I feel like we're sharing something and you feel like we're sharing something. Or I should say, you seem to feel like we're sharing something. It doesn't mean we're sharing it, it just means it seems that we are. Because you can't establish whether or not we're sharing anything. We may well be, but since you have no access to anything other than you experience, how can you know? It's just a hypothesis. And these hypotheses are fine. But since you can't verify it, it never goes beyond being a hypothesis. Whereas the presence of experience is self-verifying. It's not a hypothesis. So I recommend start with what is certain and self-verifying, and then leave a hypothesis over in the realm of hypotheses, because you can hypothesize anything. And the fact that most people are in the habit, seemingly, of hypothesizing similar things, it probably says more about the nature of shared symbol systems than it does about the truth or accuracy of any of the hypotheses. You know, people go around saying pi r squared, and everyone thinks there's a pi r squared out there. Because the shared symbol systems create the illusion of shared concepts. But that's a fallacy, because we both use the same words. You know, I say blue and you say blue, but God knows what you mean by blue. But it's easy to ignore that and say, well, I'm saying blue and you're saying blue, so of course we must be talking about the same thing, right? But that's an assertion. It's unverifiable. You can't find out one way or the other. It's possible, but it's also possible not. It's possible you don't even exist. It's possible this is all a hallucination that is occurring in my consciousness. You know, how could I know? But the presence of, you know, what we call experience itself is self-verifying and undeniable.
Does that mean that it's equally as possible that we're separate entities as that we're not?
Of course, anything's possible.
We just don't know.
No, but you can't know, so it's just a hypothesis. But all of which is fine. But what can you know? That's what's powerful. What can you know? Because all this that might be so, and all the hypotheses, you know, that's all fine. So there's this whole realm of hypotheses, an infinite realm. Anyone can assert anything they want, claim it's a hypothesis, fine. And people do. You know, gun nuts claim what they claim, and extreme fanatics of religions and politics claim what they claim, and you know, everyone claims what they claim. Okay, cool. So that's all hypothesis. So that's fine. Anyone can do that. But what exists is not a claim. What exists is self-verifyingly actual. And that's the present, you know, what we might call the presence of the experiential field. Which exists is self-verifying, and hence it can be investigated because it has properties that are not hypotheses, that exist intrinsically, that self-verifyingly are discoverable.
What are some of these properties?
Unresolvability, actuality, universal inclusiveness.
Thisness.
Huh?
Thisness.
Sure. Presence, radiance. I mean, you know, you can abstract all sorts of qualities you want, but the point isn't that the qualities exist as separate things, because that just becomes a hypothesis again. The point is that these qualities are interface points for investigating this that does undeniably exist. It's not a hypothesis. And that's what's powerful. Most people spend most of their time investing in hypotheses and then fighting with each other about their respective hypotheses. You know, it's like, you know, I like superheroes. I like chick flicks. You know, you're wrong. Superheroes are better. No, chick flicks are better. It's like, you know, yeah, maybe, but that's all just pie in the sky. There's nothing there. You know, it's fantasy. Hypotheses are all basically fantasy. Not that you can disprove them, but you can't prove them, so they're nothing. But there is something, like I said, that is not hypothesis. There is actuality. There is this that is. And what is this? That's the powerful and the interesting question. And that's where one finds transcendence. That's where one finds liberation.
Well, hypothesis is part of experience. I mean,
Of course, obviously, hypothesis, thought, they're all of those are modes or apparitions within
Right.
experience, you could call
but I guess to really experience, the radiance of experience. I mean, it has to be a little bit more direct, and so hypothesis sort of gets in the way, right? In some ways of.
Well, a hypothesis is liable to be seductive because you may possibly give undue importance or weight to the implication of the hypothesis.
Right.
And hypotheses actually have no verifiable implication, so you're jumping off into loony land.
So, and then I guess the other little clue that it's more direct was that it's unresolvable.
Yes.
I mean, that you're just,
Yeah. Anything that's actual is unresolvable. Anything that seems to be a certain way is a sure sign that it's a fantasy or a concept, you could call it.
right. But sometimes it seems to me like it's sort of like the direct experience of this is sort of like a subroutine, or it's always operating.
Yeah, of course.
But then every once in a while, I don't know, the unresolvability or something just gets so right into my face that it's just so much more direct
Sure.
experience.
Well, that's the point, you know. Direct experience has always been directly experienced.
Right.
And it's quite possible, apparently, for the awareness to be seduced and captivated by getting caught up in the fantasy of all these hypotheses.
Right.
But even that is itself nothing other than direct experience. But in its presence, in its existence, the existence of thought is actual. The content of thought is pure fantasy.
Right.
It doesn't tie into anything.
Is it possible to live without a story?
Mm.
Do you live without stories?
Do I? No. But I know their stories.
You don't believe in their actuality at all?
No. Because actuality cannot be made into a story. Because it's unresolvable. You can't say what is happening. You cannot say definitively what is here. You cannot say definitively what anything is. And stories are substantially, they consist of saying what things are. And so provisionally stories are fine. There's nothing wrong with stories. There's nothing wrong with using stories. But stories are not actual.
So you don't have an experience of obligation or responsibility ever, right?
I experience my personality feelings of obligation and responsibility.
Oh, you do? Okay. But wouldn't you have to have like a story that you believed in order to give you?
Well, my personality has been brainwashed in all kinds of stories. But the personality is just a subsystem that's appearing in actuality. So what it does is, it's a subsystem. Just like I could say, each of you is a subsystem. So my personality is doing what it's doing. You guys are each doing what you seem to be doing. And all of those exist as apparent subsystems in this, because that's where they appear. That's what they consist of. But none of them have autonomous existence, and none of them has particular importance. And all of them exist solely because of this. So they're aspects of this, you could say. But they don't have any importance. Only this has importance.
So your experience is very similar to mine, but maybe you have a lot less investment in some specific aspects of that.
I'm sure our experiences are very similar, but the only difference is when you see clearly what is actual, then anything that's not actual is seen equally clearly. It doesn't necessarily negate it or cancel it out, but it's seen clearly. It's like when you go to a movie, you're going to a movie. You don't get confused and think all of a sudden, you're in a war movie, you have to start run out of your seat screaming, ducking the bullets, because it's a movie. There's an example where it's quite clear to you what's actual and what's not, and so you don't get seduced by it. And anything and everything that you can think is like a movie. It's present as an implication, it's present as a narrative, but it has no basis in actuality, except as its own presence. In other words, the narrative has no basis in actuality. You go see a war movie doesn't mean there's a war happening.
There is someone.
Sure. Yeah, and if there's a war happening in your experience, doesn't mean there's a war happening. It just means there's phenomena appearing in your experience. And you can call that a war if you want. I mean, some people look at a war and they call it a gold mine of opportunity to make money. Other people look at a war and they're terrified and, they don't want to get blown up. Other people look at a war, it's like an opportunity to go out and fight the good fight. And I mean, I don't know, I'm just making up possible narratives. But that's what people do. They make up possible narratives. And they grab what that seems attractive to them and run with it.
Can you, like we were talking about the different planes of experience last time, and you were talking about the chakras.
Sure.
Right. Can you talk about the stuff about stories in terms of going up the different chakras? Is it like things become more and more diffuse, or there's less and less investment, or is this different qualities of?
I wouldn't look at it, and I wouldn't mix those two metaphors. I think it's just love to be murky.
Oh, okay.
Stories can happen on any level. Or let's say they could be anchored on or predominantly emphasizing any level. For example, in your waking experience, you can have narratives. You may have a felt sense of a narrative of, oh, I'm Gavin and I'm here at this thing and we're in the East Bay and blah, 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 whatever your interpretation is. So you have that. Now you go to sleep tonight and you start dreaming, all of a sudden there's a new narrative. Whatever is presenting itself there, you free associate on that and your consciousness comes up with a narrative of what you think is happening. So, but that's not sensory experience. That's on a different level.
So my sense is that there are people that have an idea or feeling that communication is difficult, and that you have your experience and I have my experience, and so and there's a sort of intensification to really try to get some sort of feeling of a clear, full connection, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of passionate activity around that, and and for you, like you just like you have the realization of whatever difficulty of experience or difficulty of communication or possibility of knowing someone else's experience, and you just that just doesn't bother you, right? So you just don't pay any attention to it.
Why would I pay attention to it?
Well, so you don't go to a therapist and say, oh, I can't seem to talk to my wife about such and such, and
What's the point of going to a therapist?
or like a tantra workshop, and oh, I just want to feel more close to my spouse or something like that. That's what. But there's lots of people who do those sort of activities, right?
Sure. But it's based on interpreting that things are a certain way, supposing they could be different, and then erecting strategies and tactics to try to affect that difference. But they're wrong in all counts. Because number one, they cannot know what's actually happening, so they can't know what the situation is. They can't know what's going to happen, so trying to erect strategies to affect something, moving from an unknown to an unknown, and pretending it's a known to a known, is just, it's random. It's like sleepwalking or something. You'll get somewhere, but it won't be where you thought. But you never get where you thought anyway. It's impossible. Because experience is entirely always unique and unpredictable in the moment. You can never know exactly what you're going to be experiencing in some other moment. Never. So that being the case, why strive for a goal? Because you're not going to end up with what you were shooting for, unless you define it in broad enough possible terms that you can claim to have achieved it.
I don't even know what I'm experiencing right now.
Well, of course. No one does.
I also didn't know what I'm going to experience.
Well,
next.
of course, no one does. That's the point. I mean, you know it, but you can't know what it. You can't define what it is. You know it by its immediacy.
I know this.
Yeah.
But I don't understand it.
Well, but that's what I mean. You can't describe it or define it or communicate it or put it into a formula or a book or whatever. But that's a given. It's impossible because it's an impossibility. It cannot be done. So it's no wonder you find it difficult.
I don't try anymore.
Well, of course. Why bother?
So Jeff, he likes to talk about that there's certain teachers that want to focus students on strategies of remediation and like things that need to be healed or something like that, right? And that's totally like the wrong route, right? So nothing needs to be healed or remediated. There's not like karma that needs to be worked through or conditioning that needs to be unraveled.
All of that is fantasy. The only thing that is possible to do is to see what this is and recognize it, or not see what this is and recognize it. And anything else that you do, fixing this and improving that and saving the whales or going green or whatever, you're welcome to do, but that's not any different than any other activity. That's not any different than going up into the kitchen and getting another cup of tea. You're not actually fixing anything. It's just part of the ongoing morphing of appearance. It can look like you go out and you go to a workshop and you take notes and you study and you practice and you learn and you get a bunch of accessories and you learn a new way to do something. But actually all that is just the passage of time and the ongoing change of what's appearing in your experiential field, which will happen whether that seemed to appear or something else seemed to appear. You can call it going to a yoga workshop, or you can call it going to the bar to drink whiskey. What's the difference? It's all just apparition. It's what it is that matters. And it happens that it's possible to see that. And when you see what it is and recognize what it is, then you have the power to discriminate what it isn't. And so then you don't need to get caught up in all of that stuff. So you become liberated from that. It doesn't change anything, but nothing changes anything. Or you should say things are already continually changing, ongoingly, unstoppably, in an unpredictable fashion. You know, there was a time, I can remember a time when the air wasn't full of smoke. Now the air is full of smoke. And there'll probably come a time when the air is not full of smoke again. Or maybe not. Maybe the air will always be full of smoke now. Who knows? Can't say. It's unpredictable. So all this kind of strategizing of trying to achieve this and fix that and remedy this is all just playing games. You're supposing, you're defining, you're pretending you have a problem, and then you're pretending there's an effective strategy to change it, and then you pretend you're participating in that strategy. Which is fine. I mean, that's viable. It's kind of, playing games is fun. That can be an amusing way to pass the time. But you'd be pathetic if you thought it was really that happening. Because you'd be under the delusion that the game you were playing was actual. It's like if you thought Monopoly was real, and you put a hotel on Boardwalk and you think you have a hotel. It's just a piece of cardboard and pieces of plastic and metal. There's no hotels, there's no boardwalk.
So, from anything appearing in the consciousness is as a universal event, you cannot see why it is happening, but you can use it as a yoga for discovery, yes, or for celebration.
Yes, exactly so. Anything. Doesn't matter what the experience is. It's all the same. The same opportunity. Exactly so.
Go further with this. The question of the man, that at least the only creature that I know that the mind can perceive the consciousness of God, is mean that God not make it need the man to recognize that, or is come this question from ignorance?
Comes from ignorance. I mean, that all of that's fine, it may be so, but that's just a story. Because there is no man. God is perceiving God.
Yes.
What sees your experience is God, and what's being seen is God. So there's no man. There's a pretense that in this apparition, this shaped like this and feels like this, oh, this is a man, and this is not a man. But it's all just apparition, and what is seeing the apparition, and what is putting the apparition there? That's what's real.
There is a phenomenon, body-mind, has a perception of the God, yes? Like the man, the only creature, according to experience, for example, we can have pi. Pi is not phenomenon, for example, for the God. So it means something about uniqueness of the man, the body-mind maybe, because, it is also ignorance question. Why?
Yes, it is. It ultimately isn't like that, because the person doesn't exist, the mind doesn't exist. They're all just apparitions. It's not any different than this. This appears in your experience, and your body appears in your experience, and your thought and your interpretation and your reactions and your emotional reaction to that appears in experience. So they're all apparitions. That's not what is seeing the apparition, And that's not what the apparition actually is, which is light. I'm not really, well, it's light, but it's not physical light.
Maybe the naked is complicated with that, or ignorance, that we don't have experienced this or that can have a perception of the God, but man with the mind can have a perception of the God.
No, man perceives nothing. God perceives everything. Man doesn't perceive.
No, perception.
No perception. Man is like a puppet. Man's an apparition. There's
Yes.
doesn't perceive anything. It's inert.
No, perceive is God, but the perception is
What is perceived? You mean? I don't really understand your words.
that I can have a concept of the God.
Sure, you can have concepts of anything, but it's fantasy. And what's powerful is to see the real thing. So you don't need to see a concept of God, see God. And you are seeing God. So then you just recognize that, and then you have the real thing. You don't need to go through concepts. Because concepts are finally just imagination. They're fantasy.
This thought come maybe because from ignorance, because I as a consciousness ask question why I bother to create this body mind for the world.
It can't be answered.
Yeah.
You know, it's
I create that.
Yeah.
I cannot answer that.
That's right.
I can say why I create that one.
That's right.
But I cannot say why I created.
That's right. That's right. God knows not what he does.
So this question, is it come from ignorance or what? Why I erase this question?
It's ignorance in the sense that the notion that there is a question that could be answered is ignorance. There's actually no question, and there's actually no answers. There's just, this is not a question, it's not an answer. It just is. And so then the mind in ignorance comes up with analysis and questions and maybe possible answers and investigation, all of these games. But all of that is actually just this. It's not what it seems to be. Question seems to be a question, but it's not really a question. It's just energy phenomena appearing instantaneously. That's all there is. Just this flash there. And the flash is itself the entirety of the process. So there's no subsequent process or effort and result or anything like that. It can seem to be that way, but that's a misinterpretation. That's of fantasy.
But also, man create the concept because from this, like a non-duality or the sage creates some method to realize that also.
Sure, all that. I mean, but again, all of the concepts don't actually help in the realization. That's just playing more games. Realization is the instant of realization. And if it seems like there's process involved in using concepts and reading books and going to see teachers and blah, 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 it can seem like that, but it isn't really that. And that's why recognition is not guaranteed by process. You know, someone can read all the books and go to all the teachers and they'll still be clueless maybe. And someone else, it'll see. Because
it can be beneficial, this pointing, like what you do now.
Well, sure. Well, maybe, yeah. But, why not? Maybe it can work, but not always.
One more thing, Peter, please. I realize conceptually, I don't have any more question, who am I, what am I, because there isn't any more question on that way, so I find that. And it seems still in the level of body and sensation, a lot of belief exists to move. So what is the game plan now in this stage? After you realize conceptually that you are that.
Yes. Don't worry about the body and all of that. Don't worry about addressing it directly. In other words, don't try to approach it like something that needs to be analyzed or dissolved or something. Instead, just continue to notice the instantaneous fact. Just notice that, and eventually, as just in the fact of noticing that, you will develop more sensitivity and more subtlety at the implications of what this is, and the fact that this is inclusively everything whatsoever. And as that develops, the investment and the habitual investment in orienting to the body and the sensations and all that as being independent will dissipate.
So the master game is different because from now I had a question, I came, who am I, and bring it up and get answers. So now is more like leave this understanding.
Yes.
That's
Don't even need to leave it. Just don't worry about it one way or the other. Maybe you spend a lot of time thinking about it. That doesn't matter. That's neither here nor there. So in other words, you don't need to reject it. Just ignore it. Whether it's there and you're doing it or not, it doesn't matter. Because again, that's just another opportunity for noticing. And noticing does not have any requirements. So in any situation whatsoever, you can be completely caught up in all sorts of thoughts and effort and speculation. And still, even that is opportunity for noticing this. And the noticing builds on itself. That's the secret. Is recognition is it's cumulative. It develops a sensitivity. It develops a more and more subtlety of being able to appreciate itself. And as this subtlety develops, then the more subtle fixations get more ghostly. They get less relevant, and eventually they don't necessarily disappear, but they become meaningless, so that it doesn't matter. And then all the functionings of the personality and the body and attachments and all of that no longer a problem, because all they are is this. So they themselves are nothing. And this becomes clearer and clearer as this sensitivity develops from repeatedly recognizing this fact.
So that means keep the sense of this openness for any event happening in my life. This is the asana. This is the yoga now.
Yes, but don't cling to it. Be very loose and easy with it. It will feel like sometimes it comes and goes. Sometimes you get distracted, but don't hold it. Just let it go. And when it comes, be with that. And then it goes, you drift off to something else. That's fine. And sooner or later it comes again, and then be with that. And every time that happens, it builds. It builds. It builds. Because this is actual, and all the rest of it is not actual. So this is more powerful. So it wins. So even though your attention and distraction will come and go, it's the recognition is more powerful, so it dominates in the long run.
Today was very special event, practical. I'm doing sales for my job. So it's sometimes lots of problem, pressure from the client to get the sold. And the other side, become a salesman, I need to get the resource from the company, and the company feel I get pressure from them. So pressure comes, so get the balance. So I said, how I can stay open on that? And this is very interesting because both want, they said, this is area for identification, and this is area for identification for my life.
Yeah.
And they said, okay, I want to use it as an asana, use it as an open.
Yes, yeah.
So I did nothing. I don't know how is something need to be erased as a universal thought to get, okay, this is you need to do after when you stay open, is appear as another thought of how you deal with this after?
Just lose spontaneity. It takes care of itself. as you develop more sensitivity, you have less and less need to dwell on your activities. So your activity becomes more spontaneous in the moment. So then you can do your sales and you can deal with all these stresses and all that, but it all disappears in the instant when it occurs. But in other words, there's no process you get caught in that you're then free of when it's over, because the process, each moment of the process, you're free of it as it's happening, and this becomes more and more apparent as your sensitivity develops.
Rather than try to solve it, to be closed, you stay open that something spontaneous will happen.
Yes. Yes, just be loose. Because the ability that you have, say you're a good salesman, the ability that you have as a salesman does not depend upon your process.
Yes.
You already are that. You have that, so you don't need to do it. When you need it, it'll be there. And then you don't need to micromanage it. You don't need to lean on it or try to control it or be doing it. You just relax, and then you're in the situation, and oh this, oh that, it just comes easily, and so then it's less entrapping because there's less thinking you have to do it.
I just noticed that. And
Yeah, and then it becomes more and more spontaneous, and so you can still function with as detailed a life as you have, but it becomes no residue. Just instantly in the moment, it's just like a candle burning or something. It just.
the last question in this area is question how to use the sex energy. For example, at the Jewish in Kabbalah when we study, and Gurdjieff, he said, for example, masturbating is disease. Use the sex, you need to have some kind of connection. Use the sex energy for inquiry. For some people, they ignore the sex.
Sex is not different than anything else. No, it's just energy. Everything's energy. You drink water, it's energy. You masturbate, it's energy. You go to a baseball game, it's energy. It's all the same. So again, just be loose and spontaneous and natural with it. So if your own nature, whatever your own nature is, don't try to contain it or push it around, manipulate it.
Stay open. This is
just be whatever you are, and your own natural responses will dictate what the action seems to be. But it's unimportant one way or the other, whether it's this or that. Maybe you're celibate, or maybe you like a lot of sex every day, or whatever. It doesn't matter.
But
the point is,
several sages came with the idea of that. If some area was important for inquiry or not.
People say all sorts of things, and I think it's a lot of trouble to try to correlate it and try to fit it all together. This is what I say. So good luck. You do what you like.
But we can resonate. The main thing, keep stay open. The identification. This is the.
Yeah, you just let everything be what it is. You don't need to hold it or push it or try to make it different. Relax and let it do itself, and see what it is in that instant. Always in the instant. Just this that is here, and it may be it's whatever is happening. It's always this that is here, always. And you just notice that. And sometimes you won't notice. Sometimes you'll be distracted. It's okay. You let it go. Very easy, loose and easy. But then sometimes you'll notice, oh yeah. Yes. But you still, you may be in sales or doing something, whatever. It doesn't matter. Sure. It's not what seems to happen is not important. It's what it is that is important. So let go of worrying about what seems to happen. Let it take care of itself and attend to what it is.
even is a universal event, what's happening.
Well, it always is.
Universal event.
That's the only event there is. There's only one event, and it's this. And it's God. Physically, concretely, this is the concrete presence of the divine right here.
Right now, there is a fire happening. You can use it as the inquiry, or as use it as a celebration, or I don't know what. It's nothing you can do. Why it's happening?
Well, it's not different than any other event. It's another quality appearing and experience. And then in terms of how it impacts your situation or your behavior, you do whatever you do. You know, one person runs away, one person goes out and buys a mask, another person ignores it. People do different things, and you know, some person stays in their house and gets burned up, another person goes to an evacuation shelter. But everyone is different, and everyone does according to what their nature dictates. And it doesn't matter what happens. What really matters is what it is.
Peter, you and your wife have realization, right? Or realized, right? And you don't necessarily believe in the rightness, but the actuality of your perspectives, or whatever, your perspectives on things, your interpretations on things being actual or being real. Right? But this doesn't save you from having fights over differences of opinion.
What does fights have to do with actuality? Look at how many fights there are in the world, and it's nothing but actuality. All the wars, all the genocide, all the crazy people killing each other. There's nothing there but actuality. Actuality doesn't stop or start fights.
I think what you mentioned, one perception not fight with the other perception. Yes. We don't fight one perception with the other perception. Yes, is your point?
Yeah, like Palestinians and Israelis have very different perceptions of
Sure.
things. Right? And they get into conflict over this.
Sure, they have different hypotheses, and they each are fanatical about their hypotheses. I mean, in some individual cases, I suppose.
And the fact that you and your wife aren't fanatical.
What makes you think we're not fanatical? You met my wife, haven't you?
Doesn't realization tone down fanaticism?
No, it just renders it irrelevant.
Tones down investment, doesn't it?
Yes. But investment is not the same thing as the event.
What does it mean by investment?
Investment means holding something important, believing it's believing it's important. For example, I do these talks, and I don't have any investment in them. It's not important to me to do it, but I do it because it's my nature to do it. It's something that I do because it's what I do. But I don't really care. If I stopped tomorrow, I'd be perfectly happy.
it's something you enjoy? And
Yeah, I enjoy it. Sure, I enjoy it. But it's not from an investment thinking that it's important.
It's not because you've taken the bodhisattva vow to make sure that all sentient beings are liberated.
Well, as a matter of fact, I have taken the bodhisattva vow, but since I know there's only one sentient being, I'm not too worried about it.
And don't you feel obligated to help us out?
I see the pointlessness of that, so. On the other hand, I'm here. So whether it helps or not is your business. I know why I'm here. I don't know why you're here.
Seems extremely easy to get caught in the concept of becoming realized.
Yeah, there's no such thing.
That concept seems sticky.
It's a concept. There's no such thing as realization. Realization is recognizing what has always been the case. You know, it's so easy to think of it as some change of status or change in condition. It's not. It's just getting real. It's just acknowledging what you are and have always been. You don't gain anything. For that matter, you don't lose anything. But you see what it is. You see what it has always been, and actually you see what you've always been seeing. So it's not even seeing anything different. But you see that there's no implication to it. You know, that in delusion there seems to be all sorts of implication. And you see there is no implications to anything. And so then things are just what they are. And so it's very simple.
But you're not denying the question raised to him. He can use it as an inquiry. Who is asking this question and who am I? This is, you can connect with that one? Because since you separate I am this, and then you want to solve the problem, found the answer. But if you are that, then it makes sense.
But I've heard that it's but something did change for you after you took PCB that one night, and you woke up with your consciousness.
It didn't really change. I just noticed it with a more open perspective. Let's say there was less self-hypnotic denial. Closeness is just hypnotic. It's just a state of self-hypnosis. You hypnotize yourself to think things are closed, and then it feels like things are closed, and you feel like your vision is limited. But it's not. But nothing actually has happened. It's just hypnosis. Nothing can be closed. There's nothing to close.
So that decrease in self-hypnosis did have certain seeming effects.
It doesn't have an effect. It has a revelation.
Apparent revelation.
Well, all revelations are apparent.
The outward circumstances of your life didn't change at all.
My outward circumstances have continually changed every nanosecond.
Maybe different is different for the more trust. You develop trust and more free. That one, you get trust and
Well, it's stronger than trust. It's not trust, it's certainty. When you see what is, then you don't need to trust it because you see it. It verifies itself. It's true because it's real. It's actual, and everything else that is not actual is invalidated. So that's why. So that's why if you see what this actually, when you see what anything actually is, then what it isn't, it is possible to think that it is disproved. It's invalidated. The mind may still think it, but it's just a hypothesis. It's just a thought. It doesn't have, it's not mystifying. It's not confusing because it doesn't seem to be true. You know for a fact it's not true.
Now, are you letting go of something, or is that also a concept?
No, you're not letting go of anything because there was never anything there. You're seeing that there is nothing to let go of. So it can seem, it's kind of paradoxical because it can seem like you're letting go of something, but when you see there's nothing to let go of, there's nothing there, then it's sort of does that seeing intrinsically lets it go, so to speak, but not there's not actually an it to let go, but it has the same effect as if you had let go of things.
We're talking about like a story.
Yes.
And
When you see that interpretations are inaccurate, then they're invalidated. They just become, there seem to be stories rather than truths or possible truths, which can be very confusing.
I think you used the word closed or closed.
Uh-huh.
Nothing is closed.
Yeah, well, I was talking about that in relation to something Gavin brought up. Experience can seem to be closed,
But like
but in various ways.
the sense of self as a closed
Sure.
entity,
Yeah.
as separate from.
Yeah, spatializing a sense of self is a classic example of hypnosis. In actuality, self permeates the field. But to have a sense of self that is, in some sense, restricted or tunnel vision textured is a fantasy, but it's a fantasy that can seem to be actualized by an essentially hypnotic mechanism. You know what? We're chatting right through our break time. Let's have our priorities straight here.
Let's just keep on going.
It's very nice.
Peter, one more area that I want to explore, we are talking about understanding love and beauty, three aspects of the consciousness. So for you, some kind of the music or some kind of the art is more objective. For example, Rembrandt compared to modern art, we can say it's more evoke who you are rather than.
Yeah, I mean, but that's down to the nature of the personality. It's not intrinsic. Everything whatsoever is pure understanding and pure beauty.
Because understanding is objective, understanding is from consciousness, it's not
Yeah.
subjective.
Yeah, it's not an understanding you can say. It's the knowing of the essence of it.
So the question, if you can say the same objective in beauty, in architecture, music, or who is subjective, this area you cannot.
But everything is equally beautiful. Everything is equally profound. But because of the nature of individuality, you have a bias towards some things that are more resonant for you and other things that are less. But different, unique to your nature. So that's where it comes with the personality. So you like Rembrandt, but you don't like Van Gogh, let's say. But that doesn't mean Rembrandt's better than Van Gogh. It just means for you, it resonates for you. Or some person likes classical music, and another one likes rock and roll. It's just down to the nature of your energy system that you're manifest as.
I was thinking maybe there is more objectivity to that, it's not subjective. For example, some kind of the music, like a Bach, or for experience, maybe design or some art, design the space or the sound much better. Beauty, I don't know, than the others. It's not more
Well,
above the subjectivity, yes?
I mean, obviously, some things are more subtle, more complex, more nuanced than others that are more crude or primitive. It just in the way that they are worked, perhaps. But still, in all, the value of the appreciation of it is subjective. But everything's the same. You see dog shit on the sidewalk, and you see a Van Gogh, and it's the same beauty. Because the beauty that it is this. It's not the dog shit or the Van Gogh. But then you have the preference for your nature. Maybe you prefer the Van Gogh. Maybe some people prefer the dog shit. You never know.
John Waters.
Yeah, right, John Waters. But that's okay, because what you recognize as beauty is a way of recognizing the actual beauty. And something that you don't recognize as beauty, it doesn't mean that it isn't beauty. It's not in your nature to recognize that medium, say. But there's only one objectivity, and the objectivity is this here, that is inclusive, and it's everything the same. There's no difference. I mean, it's infinitely differentiated in the apparition, but it's all exactly the same thing. And it's all pure intelligence and pure beauty and pure profundity.
And it's irrelevant if something evokes you more
Yes.
than the others.
Yes. And you're free to, in terms of your own behavior and participation, you're free to, go to what you enjoy. But it doesn't mean that it actually is like that. You're just recognizing it. But the same thing could theoretically be recognized in anything else. but because of the uniqueness of your manifest nature, you have a tendency to, you're the way you are, and that brings out a certain resonance of biases. You know, the things you're inclined towards and the things you're inclined away from, so on and so forth.
So you cannot refer to refinement of the things?
I'm sorry?
Refinement.
Yeah.
So it's more, can be more awoke who you are, how much more refined, or is subjective?
Well, everything is infinitely refined, actually. Because when you look at anything, I don't mean just visual, but any kind of, anything in experience is infinitely subtle. Nothing is coarse. Everything is infinitely subtle. And it's the mind that concretizes it as this or that, that sees, that thinks something, this is more subtle and this is more coarse. But it's not really like that. Everything is infinitely subtle.
So, question of the harmony or disharmony is?
Yeah, the harmony or disharmony is to you. Everything, everything is the same to God. God likes war just as much as God likes death just as much as birth, likes war just as much as peace. Likes destruction just as much as creation.
Maybe the level of the God, yes, but I cannot imagine the Rembrandt painting for me. I don't know. There's some junk, I call it. It'd be the same refinement.
Yeah, but that's for you. That's because that's your nature, and that's okay, because your nature exists as the apparent subsystem that you are, sort of karmically. So you are the way you are because of your karma. Let's say you're the way that you are. You being the way you are is your karma, and because you're the way you are, you have certain tastes. You have certain, you know, you like this, you don't like that. You're drawn to this, you're not drawn to that. You know, so on and so forth. But that's only relevant in the small portion of you. Let's say the small portion of your being that is manifest in a human dimension. Let's say. But you also you also include everything else in the full field of being, most of which is not your human, oriented around the human personality. So, for example, when you dream, your aesthetic sense might be very different than in the waking world. You know, you might want things to be a certain way in the waking world, but you might have dreams that you wouldn't have dreamt on purpose, but you did dream it on purpose. So why? So what's up with that? So then your nature, you have another nature and on a subtler level that's different than in the personal level, and then in other levels maybe even more so in various ways.
So maybe in the same way, you don't distinguish between thought, you call it intuition, the thought that can maybe be ignorance. So or the thought is the same.
Same. The only difference is whether you see what it is or not. That's the difference between delusion and realization, is seeing what it is. The phenomena itself is the same.
So if we call it intuition, it's not make it this thought different than the other thought.
There's no difference. Intuition is seeing more what it actually is, and less to the superficial content, which is more oriented to your habitual thought patterns. When you recognize what this is, it's beyond thought.
Yes.
It's beyond it's beyond your individual nature. So this is what it is, regardless of your nature, regardless of what you like or what you don't like, regardless of I think this, I don't think that. All of that appears in this, but this itself is not limited by that. So any apparent limitation or particularity of your individuality, the actual nature is not limited by that. And you are this actual nature, so you're really unlimited, even though a portion of you appears as if it was perhaps limited. But you're not really, but that's only a small part of you, so you're not really limited by that. And so in recognition, you see that you're beyond your individuality, even as you include it. So the body's here, the personality is here, all the particularity is here, but there's more here, and you're that also. So you're beyond your own limitation, ultimately to the absolute. And you see that with recognition. When you recognize this that is here, then that's why it can be called liberation, because you become free of the notion that you're stuck being the individual you are. You are the individual you are, but you're also more than that. It's like you being you in this life is like a dream that's happening, and you're the dreamer. So the apparition is there, and the limitation, the apparent limitation is there, perhaps, but what it really is, and what's doing it, and what you really are, is not stuck in that. Is just seeing that.
But at the same time, you can say when you recognize you are this, maybe it's programming your sensitivity more. Maybe because your openness, you become more sensitive about preference changing.
Yeah. And when you get more of a sense from recognition that you're beyond the particularities, then the particularities may relax somewhat. But maybe not so much. It's not important. The idea is not to change what you are, just see what it is. And then it may or may not change, but it doesn't matter. Because it really doesn't matter. When you see that you're beyond it, then you see the way in which it doesn't matter. So then you're free of it.
And you can't change it anyhow.
Yeah, well. I mean, but it may or may not change in any old way, but it's like, but who gives a shit?
But if you wanted to change,
good fucking luck.
it's going to stop you seeing.
Yeah.
It's probably why when it comes to this stuff, they want something to change.
Well, sure. Again, it's very, human psychology is full of all sorts of self-criticism and self-loathing and stuff. And we think what's wrong with us, and if only I was like this, everything would be so much better. What can I do about it? But it's a misunderstanding. It's not like that.
You talk about participation.
In what sense?
How this is participatory.
Well, it's very strange. It's very peculiar. There's obviously a very deep sense of participation. This issue kind of goes to the bottom of and goes to the core of the whole issue of free will versus determination. And free will versus determination philosophically simplifies the two extremes of the spectrum of actual participation. First of all, participation is transcendental. So you can't, because participation is of the nature of this. So you can't pin down exactly what it is or how it is, or it's this or it's not this, or so on and so forth. But, you know, it's manifest. I mean, it's quite obvious that there's some degree of a sense of participation. You have, you know, it's likely you have some explicit sense that you can, of the ability to do, the ability to engage, the ability to function in a stronger sense than just kind of watching it from a completely, you know, disinterested perspective. But again, at the same time, you don't probably have total control. You know, things follow them on course, and there's a great deal of powerlessness or inability to make things be the way you want them to. But at the same time, there is some degree of seeming participation where you can, you know, seem to be engaged in functionings that seems to be more immediate and more engaged than just a kind of a distant, you know, watching from a distance. And, you know, other than, I mean, the main thing is to notice that fact and notice that it doesn't resolve into any simple condition. It doesn't resolve simply down to either free will or predestination. Because free will isn't really free in a simplistic sense, and neither is it absolutely predestined in a simplistic sense. It's subtle, it's weird, it's transcendental. And so, as always, the point is to see what the actuality is without wanting to or expecting to be able to pin it down or get a handle on it. And above all, take advantage of it. Because it's a major mode of engagement and a major mode of revelation to, you know, to discover what this is.
Participation seems to me to imply activity. And activity is irrelevant.
It's irrelevant, but it's evident. I mean, whatever it is evident. You can't say what it is, but
Yeah, but you, depends on your definition of participation, but you don't actually have to participate.
no. But in the same time, you do.
Well, by knowing this, you are participating in this.
Yeah, but this part, kind of what I'm trying to get at is that this participates in itself.
Yes.
In a profound sense, and not just not any kind of simple sense.
No, absolutely.
I mean, this is doing itself very hands-on, you could say. It's not doing itself in a tentative or a removed fashion. It's very immersed in itself, and that shows up as our seeming immersion in our seeming activities and so on and so forth. And that's kind of the what I hope to touch on with this whole notion. Because like any aspect of this, it's a mirage. You can't actually find it, but at the same time, it's somewhat intuitively evident that, you know, that you're not just here in some delicate, removed, effete way. You're here, you know, very, very engagedly in all of it, you know, in seeming biological function and seeming social function and all these various things. There's a presence, and it's a seemingly active presence or engaged presence. And so that's kind of what I refer to as participation. But again, like I said, you know, the main point is to see what it really is, rather than being philosophical about it.
Very graded on participation.
Is that?
All right, this participation is part of the grade.
Ah. No grades.
This conversation about one of the things said in the Satsang with the sage is not only question and answer, is something transmissional that is not beyond the world. What is that?
You can't say.
But it exists. You experience it.
Yes, it exists.
It's the same thing.
It is the same thing. It's basically recognition. But what that is and why it seems to happen in various circumstances is unfathomable.
And it also exists when you do video conference, or it's not
Sure.
physical. It's the same.
Sure, not just me, anyone, anything. You talk to somebody, there's a resonance there. You know, people are not flavorless. People have a richness, and that richness communicates itself, in engagement.
Because the experience to watch your video on the internet is not the same to be in the Sangha to be here as an experience.
No,
Sorry?
I get the same kind of thing.
But you're easy though.
Okay. But is something objective to that, to the Sangha, or we cannot say?
You can't say, but it's really about you.
There's nothing objective, it's subjective.
Well, there's no objective and subjective are the same thing. There isn't subjective and objective. See, for you alone exist, and everything else is an apparition in you. And so anything that seems to happen, or any discovery you make, or any revelation, or any transmission, or anything like that, is happening in you. And then the circumstances that seem to be involved with that, what that is and how that goes on, you can't pin it down. But that's always the case. You can never pin it down, what anything is, because it's all unresolvable.
So how I can know this transmission is not fantasy, or is something from my experience exists, or is just
Well, it's not important.
not important?
It takes care of itself. It doesn't. It's not important that you recognize it or not. If it's there, it's there, and if it does something, it does something, and
On one level, it is real.
I think so. It is real, yeah, definitely.
It is real.
But you can't say what it is,
You can't
and
say
you
what
can't
it is,
contrive it. So
but I can quite categorically say it's not fantasy.
yeah,
It might have fantasy in it, but it's not.
no, for
It
sure.
is not solely fantasy.
No, it's real.
It's real.
So
But
it
it's-
means based on experience, you can recognize that.
Sure.
Yes.
And for me, it's like the after. Things change after. It's like there's a shift, something.
Yeah, I mean, I think real transmission is really obvious. In my experience, it's very obvious. So it's not. So it's not a matter of wondering whether it happened or not. It's more a matter of trying to pick yourself up off the floor.
When you see it's obvious, you can see that in others, it's happened.
No, for you. You can't tell what's on it with someone else, because they may be just hypnotizing themselves.
So your experiences of transmission, you're mostly talking about your experiences of Pinot?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So you haven't received transmissions of that order or anything like that from anyone else?
Yes, from Muktananda, but that was after Pinot, so it was sort of the same. It was more recognition of the same thing. I saw that Muktananda had what Pinot had, and so it was more of a appreciation than impactful for me.
But you didn't have any sense of transmission until after your opening when you were 22, right?
Well, that was when I, no, that's not true. All my experience with Pino was full of transmission. I mean, my experience with Pino, the way I would recognize the transmission is he would make me dizzy.
Oh.
I would be with him and it was like, what just happened?
Oh, I said that.
What just happened?
I would hate that one.
But it's absolutely delightful.
Oh, it's exquisite. It's the best.
But at the same time, you cannot point or say this way you can recognize this transmission because it's individual.
If it's real, you will know it's real. And at any rate, it's not important to recognize it anyway because it's automatic. It takes care of itself. Transmission is not anything you have to do anything with. Transmission is kind of like getting hit by a bus. You don't really need to worry about it. If it happens, it happens, and and that's that.
So, sometimes when I'm around you, I get kind of confused, and then I feel like I need to rub this part. Is that transmission?
Maybe it's your problem whether or not that's transmission.
Are you put in a different category than interest? For example, if I have interest to come to your event, and if I know it's transmission or not transmission is the same?
No. No, transmission is like a reaction.
Reaction.
Yes. It's like
I think you can feel transmission without realization.
yes, definitely. You know there's something there and you don't know what it is, but it's amazing and it's very cool.
I sat with my guru for years, and there was something there. I didn't know what it was, but there was
No.
definitely
Well,
something.
you can't know what it is. That's the nature of it.
But now I know what it is.
Yeah.
And whether
Yeah. Anyhow, transmission is not really important as a topic because again, it's something that takes care of itself. It's not anything that you can sort of think about it after the fact or talk about it after the fact, but no one else than you is really going to know what you're talking about anyway.
But follow your interest, this is, yes, matter, because this is your interest.
Sure. Yeah, by all means. I mean, follow your interest, follow your intuition, do what you think is the truest or the most, most valuable, by all means.
I found that very difficult to know what was coming.
Well, it's impossible, but still in all.
But once you,
But you're drawn to things irrationally,
it's,
and you find yourself doing something and think, why am I doing this, But you do it anyway. And in the end of the day, that's life, that's spiritual process. It never makes any sense. Doesn't make any sense at the time, and it doesn't make any sense long after. I mean, why come over here and sit together for a few hours chatting about all this insane stuff,
Because there is an interest.
Yeah, exactly. If it seems valuable, then it seems valuable. And that's,
You can do noticing practice with transmission. Right?
Definitely. Transmission is noticing. Transmission is having noticing foisted off on you. you could say.
What was the last sentence?
Foisted, that means imposed on you.
Forced.
Yeah. Transmission is disorienting. It's always disorienting. You know, it's like, what's happening? Then that's the very nature of it. It takes you, it puts you outside your normal interpretive framework. It rubs your nose in the fact that you are outside that framework anyway, and rubs your nose with that portion of yourself that is outside. Because it's until you're strongly realized it's very difficult to know what this is about, to know what's going on here. And typically, you know, a person who's not realized but who's into this will have a sense that, well, there's something here, you know, and then, you know, but you don't know what it is, and you know the whole thing is just sort of strange and mysterious, but it has a potency to it. There's something there that's palpable. It's felt to be there, but you don't know what it is. And you know, this is the flavor of transmission. It's because you're sort of forcibly confronting outside your normalcy. And since it is outside your normalcy, it's weird and you can't get a handle on it. It might freak you out a little bit or something. Remember that bit in the Doctor Strange movie where she first takes him and he goes like this and goes like this and throws him out into the bardos and stuff. Well, that's a little bit of a fantastic depiction of it, but the idea is pretty right off the money.
I did something kind of interesting yesterday. I had all this anger showing up, and at some point I just decided to be the anger instead of feeling angry. And it was like just a line of radiance. It was like, I mean, I was calling it anger, but it was like, it was the texture.
Sometimes with the transmission or energetic resonance with certain things, the energy seems there, but the view or the message on an intellectual level is not. It seems totally off.
That's a good sign. If it's anything like what you expect, then it's not valuable.
And if you enjoy the hell out of it, that's a good sign.
Well, that's sensible. Enjoy the hell out of everything. Why not?
It's like I feel like all of the parts of my being line up around it.
Yeah. I mean, this is part and parcel of powerful spiritual engagement. It's mysterious and you don't know what it is, but it has a power it has a potency and it has an attractiveness, and you feel it reshaping you. It seems to be reshaping you. But you don't know what's happening. You don't know what it is. And the more clear you become in realizing what it is, the less you know what it is. No, I should say the less your arrogance at thinking, at claiming to know what it is, shows up.
But sometimes you know what changed, and something changes, you know exactly what changed. It's like sometimes there's like a palpable shift in how the world seems or what's happening in one particular little piece of something.
Well, everything's shifting all the time. So I don't know.
It is a palpable shift. It's just incomprehensible.
Yeah. It's a shift away from comprehensibility.
Everything you do, you don't anymore.
Yes. Yeah. The essence of delusion is thinking you know what's going on, what anything is. The essence of realization is owning the certainty that you don't have a clue, and that there is no clue to be had.
When I'm in the midst of a sort of experience of transmission, the way I sometimes want to describe it to myself is to say something like, say sort of inwardly, that I'm so in love with love. That's kind of like, which doesn't really make any sense, but it seems sort of evocative of what goes on.
Very poetic and romantic.
I guess
Yeah, when you're romantic.
It is.
No, he is. Very-
coming back to that metaphor of the planes, then that would just be sort of speaking at this level.
Which is that, the love in love with love?
Yeah.
Maybe. Depends what you mean by it.
I don't know what I mean. Feels that way.
There is as unfoldment occurs, there is how can I put it? I can't find words. Forget it.
The Sufi poets, they're always sort of speaking in that same vein, right? When they talk about like drunkenness or yeah.
There's I keep by finding words in there completely wrong. So it's something like a spontaneous passion that is unleashed in unfoldment. But that's not the right way to put it. It's like an undamming of profound emotion.
Flooding of all.
Yeah, a flooding of all, but in a sense that is very juicy. Anyway, the words aren't right, so it's probably not important. Takes care of itself, so you don't need to worry about it.
I don't know if I've ever seen you so at loss for words to talk about something.
I'm always at a loss for words.
You cover it up well.
Well, I'm trying to talk about that which can't be talked about. So it's it's an uphill battle.
I feel like if I'm doing the noticing, what I think is poor noticing, it feels like I'm stuck in composition, and if I feel like I'm doing it effectively, it feels like I'm improvising.
Yeah.
But there's also the other side where I just step playing altogether, and that's not useful either.
Yeah, noticing is like an engaged, lively discovery. It's jumping into the unknown. So there's a jumping. So in that sense, it's participatory, but you don't really know what you're doing or how you're doing it or what you're jumping into either. So in a sense, it's transcendental.
What about jumping in without a story? That sounds almost like Alzheimer's.
Maybe it is. Maybe Alzheimer's is the short path.
I mean, to be without
Well, noticing is always seeing beyond your own stories to some degree, at least, or seeing that beyond your story, actuality is still there, and you don't know what it is. So within your story, you know what things are, but you have your labels and descriptions of anything that seems to be appearing. But in everything else, you sort of, you go to the thing, but those labels aren't available anymore. And but nothing disappears. Everything is still there. And again, typically that's sort of a flash, and then you sort of will drift back into labels and so on and so forth. But the point is that discovery that experience exists outside of labels, because in normal, so-called normal, mundane, consensus reality type experience, the labels in the experience are always present, so it can be easy to think that they actually coexist, but they don't. The experience has no labels. Experience has no names. Experience has no words, and it's possible to notice that. Notice your own experience is you don't know what it is. You don't know where it is. You don't know anything about it. You can step back into your labeling and step back into your interpretive framework and, oh yeah, this is a light and we're sitting around in a room and this is a discussion and blah, 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 blah. But then you can just sort of piece through that, and then it's just, this is here. This is here. And you can't say what it is. But it doesn't diminish. On the contrary, it's discovered to be much, much richer than, because the very fact of all the labeling and interpreting has an inherent censorship that it becomes imposed, where things become smaller and more lifeless and more static and more stabilized. Whereas when you see through that, there's a vitality and a mystery and a spontaneity that is palpable and quite obvious and self-verifying. So in a certain sense, it's beyond the story, but it doesn't necessarily mean stopping stories, or it's sort of more, it's more seeing beyond, seeing that there is reality outside of stories. even if you go back to the stories, but then you've seen that the story isn't actually at the boundary. The story is sort of a layer that's floating around here, and the boundary of experience, I mean, so-called, there is no boundary, of course, but is out there, outside of the story.
In terms of transmission, it's not like you direct it at someone or intend for someone to get it. Is it? I mean, like it's more. There's an openness within that person for it, or
Transmission is intimacy, but it becomes received transmission if that intimacy is recognized.
And you always know when that intimacy has been recognized in one of your students?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The word recognized is the student may not have recognized that they recognized. But I know intimacy. Intimacy is kind of what I do.
I'm sorry, that reminds me of this stupid quote that from pop psychology, into me you see. But that's what you're talking about is basically the opposite, right? Because there's no like subject to it. There's no sense of communication across boundaries.
Right. There's nothing but absolute intimacy, and that's the very nature of realization. There's no separation. There's no distance. There's nothing. Everything is absolutely collapsed at a point source. The seeing is right here. The seeing is right here. You know, with nothing concealed, there's nothing to impede it whatsoever. This is the very nature of presence. It's the nature of experience. And when that is recognized, then it becomes more displayed. So if you talk to someone who knows that, you can see it in them, whether or not you're aware of seeing it in them. Because there's no walls, there's no barriers. It's like looking into the night sky or something.
I've been in a situation where around you I've seen people who get it.
Yeah.
They just absolutely get it and think, that's transformed their whole life. And then the next thing they say is, well, what does this mean? And, what? I just understood the essential truth. And now you're asking, like, what is God? Or whatever the question is. It doesn't matter what the question is. And I've given up trying to guess if somebody understands.
No, you can't. Yeah, no.
I mean, it's just like, I was so sure the first time it happened. somebody's been coming to see you for years, and wow, it's just amazing. And within 10 minutes, he'd ask another question, which was like, what?
Yeah. Well, that happens a lot. You know, reality is easy to see, unreality is hard to let go of. So it's really just down to a person, you know, having it stick.
Yeah.
Because it sort of bounces, there's a tendency to bounce back into one's normalcy.
So this intimacy thing, I feel like I go into that place really, really deeply sometimes as a receptor, but I find it exhausting. I mean, it's like if we did this communication.
Oh, but that's a good sign. That means you're being stretched beyond your comfort zone.
Okay.
Yeah, if it's a little exhausting or a little dizzying or a little disorienting, that's a really good sign.
You know me, it's always going to be
Right.
exhausting.
I don't know why you don't just bring a pillow and a mattress to this.
Sometimes I stay awake.
That's true.
You can lie down, so.
No. I'd much rather be exhausted and busy.
Oh, yeah, and that's a good sign too. If you like it, you're exhausted and dizzy and disoriented, but you like it, you know, because you recognize that there's something there of value.
I don't know if this makes any sense, but recognizing that you're stuck in interpretation and recognizing that you're not stuck in interpretation the same.
Yes. You're never not stuck in interpretation, but you're never stuck in interpretation. Because the interpretive mind thinks of those as opposites, but they're not actually opposites. And that is our closing point for tonight.
Thank you, Peter.